At 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday night, something happened in northern Israel that I have been warning about for the better part of 2 years, and that the political establishment in Washington refused to take seriously until it was too late to matter. In the span of 4 hours and 19 minutes, Iranian precision strike assets systematically destroyed all 18 fuel storage and distribution depots serving the IDF Northern Command. Not some of them, not most of them, all 18. Every single facility that moves diesel, aviation fuel, and armored vehicle lubricants from the port system into the operational bloodstream of Israel's most critical military theater was reduced to burning infrastructure before midnight. I've analyzed armored warfare for 3 decades. I've studied every major tank engagement from the Sinai to the Gulf to the plains of eastern Ukraine, and I can tell you with complete professional conviction that what happened to Israel's northern armored force this morning represents one of the most efficiently executed logistical kill campaigns in the history of modern ground warfare. Iran did not need to destroy those tanks, it only needed to destroy what feeds them. And in a single operational night, it did exactly that. The numbers are unambiguous. 18 fuel depots, every significant petroleum storage and distribution node supporting IDF armored operations across the northern sector, from the Lebanese border to the Jordan Valley, were struck between 1:14 a.m. and 4:47 a.m. local time. The fires from the last depot were still burning when the first damage assessments reached Northern Command headquarters. 200 Merkava 4 main battle tanks, the backbone of Israel's ground deterrence on the northern front, had fuel reserves that under sustained operational conditions last approximately 36 to 48 hours of active movement, with no resupply pathway intact and no alternative distribution infrastructure available. Those tanks are not a fighting force. They are an expensive collection of stationary targets waiting for the follow-on strike that Iranian operational doctrine almost certainly has already planned. At 6:23 a.m., Northern Command issued the operational suspension order that military historians will study for generations. Not a retreat, not a tactical withdrawal to prepared positions. A suspension, the formal acknowledgement that the force can no longer execute its assigned mission because the material foundation of that mission has been destroyed. In practical terms, it is a surrender of operational initiative that carries consequences extending far beyond the immediate tactical situation. When a command suspends operations because its tanks have run dry, it does not simply pause. It concedes the initiative to an adversary who can now maneuver, reinforce and position without opposition, and who has demonstrated the precision and the will to use every hour of that freedom productively. Today we answer the questions that Israel's War Cabinet and Washington's National Security Council are locked in emergency session over right now. How did Iran identify, target, and destroy 18 separate fuel depots simultaneously? And what does the precision of that targeting reveal about the intelligence architecture Thrawn has been building for years? What does the immobilization of 200 Merkava for tanks actually mean for Israel's ability to defend its northern border against a Hezbollah ground force that has been preparing for exactly this scenario? Why has Northern Command's operational suspension sent shockwaves through every NATO capital? And what does it tell us about the true vulnerability of armor-heavy force structures in an era of precision logistics interdiction? And where does this conflict go from here when Iran has demonstrated it can shut down an entire front without firing a single shot at a single tank? If this analysis is giving you the depth and honesty that this conflict demands, subscribe and stay with me. Hit like. Share this breakdown with anyone trying to understand what is actually unfolding in the Northern Theater and drop your assessment in the comments. The conversation happening in this community is one of the most serious anywhere. Now let us get into the full breakdown. The targeting architecture behind the 18 depot strike campaign is from a professional standpoint the most instructive element of the entire operation because it reveals a level of intelligence preparation and operational planning that goes far beyond what Iran's adversaries had publicly assessed as its current capability. Let me walk through what this targeting problem actually involves, because the difficulty is not immediately obvious to observers without a logistics background. Fuel depots supporting armored operations are not large, static, easily visible installations sitting in open terrain with clear markings. They are deliberately dispersed, partially buried, camouflaged, and distributed across the operational area specifically to prevent exactly the kind of single-strike logistics interdiction that Iran just executed. The IDF's northern sector fuel infrastructure was designed with dispersal as its primary survivability concept. The assumption being that no adversary could simultaneously locate, target, and strike enough nodes to produce a complete supply failure across the entire sector. That assumption rested on an intelligence denial posture, keeping the precise locations of fuel storage nodes out of adversary targeting databases through operational security, emission control, and physical concealment. What the events of this night demonstrate is that Iran's intelligence preparation had penetrated that denial posture completely. Every one of the 18 targeted depots was struck with weapons that arrived on precise aim points, not approximate locations, not area effect attacks designed to catch a facility somewhere within a radius, but direct hits on the specific storage and distribution infrastructure at each node. That level of targeting fidelity requires a targeting database built over years through a combination of signals intelligence, imagery analysis, human source reporting, and potentially cyber collection against the logistics management systems that track fuel inventory and distribution across the sector. The strike package itself consisted primarily of Shahed 238 jet-powered loitering munitions and Fate 1 precision ballistic missiles, a combination that presented the defending system with two fundamentally different engagement problems simultaneously. The Fate 110 ballistic missiles arrived at hypersonic terminal velocities from high altitude, demanding the attention of Arrow and Patriot batteries. The Shahed 238 drones arrived simultaneously at low altitude from multiple axes, exploiting the radar masking that the defending system's attention to the ballistic threat created. The 18 depots were distributed across a geographic area of approximately 4,800 square kilometers, requiring simultaneous strikes from launch platforms positioned across a wide arc to achieve the timing compression that prevented any depot from receiving warning and initiating emergency dispersal or suppression of its above-ground storage before impact. The sequencing within each individual depot strike reflects a level of target analysis that goes beyond simply hitting a fuel storage area. At each location, the available post-strike imagery shows a consistent pattern. The primary above-ground storage tanks were struck first, initiating fires that prevented emergency response. The underground tank connections and distribution pipelines were struck second, eliminating the possibility of recovering stored fuel from protected underground reserves. The fuel distribution vehicles, the tank trucks that could potentially serve as mobile resupply assets, were struck at their parking and maintenance areas as the third element of each sub-package. This three-element sequencing at every individual depot reflects a targeting analysis that understood not just where the fuel was stored, but how the distribution system functioned, and what would need to be destroyed to make recovery impossible rather than merely difficult. The result was complete. Not 70% degradation of northern sector fuel supply capacity, not significant disruption requiring days to overcome. Complete elimination of the fixed fuel infrastructure supporting armored operations across the entire northern sector, achieved in 3 hours and 33 minutes of operational execution. By 5:00 a.m., the fuel status of the Northern Armored Force was as follows. The 200 Maraba 4 tanks of the 36th Armor Division and its attached brigade elements carried internal fuel loads ranging from 40% to 85% of capacity, depending on their operational activity in the preceding 24 hours. At operational movement consumption rates, this represents between 18 and 41 hours of fuel remaining per vehicle. Without resupply, the most fuel-efficient vehicle in the force reaches operational fuel exhaustion within 41 hours of the depot destruction. The least fuel-efficient reaches it within 18 hours. There is no alternative fixed infrastructure capable of providing resupply. The overland resupply route from central sector depots involves a road network that Iran's operational doctrine almost certainly has already targeted for interdiction. The arithmetic is not complicated. It has only one answer. The Marava 4 is genuinely one of the finest main battle tanks ever built. I say that without qualification or political motivation, it is a technically excellent weapons system whose design reflects decades of hard-won Israeli operational experience and genuine engineering innovation. Its composite armor package, its unique front-engine configuration that improves crew survivability, its fire control system, its ability to carry infantry in its rear compartment. These are real capabilities that make it a formidable platform in the operational environments for which it was designed. None of those capabilities function without fuel. The Marava 4 is powered by a 1,500 horsepower diesel engine that consumes approximately 400 L of fuel per 100 kilometers of road movement, and significantly more under cross-country or combat conditions. Its internal fuel capacity is 1,400 L, giving it a theoretical operational range of approximately 500 kilometers under ideal conditions. In the high-intensity operational environment of the Northern Front, frequent position changes, engine idling for climate control and systems operation, a terrain that is significantly more demanding than paved road. Actual operational range is considerably lower, and fuel consumption per hour of operation is considerably higher than the theoretical figures suggest. 200 tanks with an average fuel load of 60% capacity at the moment of depot destruction carry approximately $168,000 liters of fuel, collectively under sustained operational conditions, the kind that a northern front-facing Hezbollah pressure would require that collective fuel reserve supports less than 30 hours of active operations before the first vehicles begin reaching fuel exhaustion within 48 hours of depot destruction. The force transitions from a mobile armored formation capable of maneuver warfare to a collection of static defensive positions whose mobility is limited to the minimum movement required to maintain tactical positioning. What makes this transition so operationally consequential is the asymmetry it creates between the immobilized Israeli armor and the adversary force it is designed to deter. Hezbollah's anti-tank capability, built around a combination of Corée laser-guided missiles, MEDISM systems, and more recently, Iranian-supplied Dahabia variants, is specifically optimized for engagement of armor at ranges between 5,500 meters from concealed firing positions. Against mobile armor conducting active maneuver, these systems must engage moving targets whose unpredictable movement complicates the guidance solution. Against static armor whose movement is constrained by fuel exhaustion, the engagement geometry shifts dramatically in favor of the anti-tank operator. A Marava sitting in a fixed position because it cannot move is not a defensive asset. It is a target waiting for an engagement solution that the adversary can take its time developing. The deeper strategic significance of the Merkava immobilization extends beyond the immediate tactical situation on the Northern Front. Israel's entire ground deterrence posture against Hezbollah has rested on the credibility of its armored response capability. The ability to rapidly concentrate armored forces cross the border and conduct deep penetration operations that destroy Hezbollah's infrastructure before it can sustain extended offensive operations. That credibility is built on mobility. Without fuel, the mobility is gone. Without mobility, the deterrence is gone. And without deterrence, Hezbollah's operational planning calculus changes in ways that create pressure across the entire northern security architecture. Simultaneously, the Iranian operational planners who designed this campaign understood the Marava's fuel dependency not as a peripheral vulnerability, but as the central vulnerability around which the entire interdiction concept was built. You do not need to defeat 200 of the world's best tanks in direct combat if you can eliminate the fuel infrastructure that makes them operational. The elegance of the approach targeting the support system, rather than the weapon system itself, reflects a strategic sophistication that deserves genuine professional respect, regardless of one's political perspective on the conflict. Having observed American crisis response to Middle Eastern military emergencies across multiple administrations, I can tell you that the pattern that follows a major Allied military setback is normally quite predictable. Emergency consultations, accelerated weapons transfers, public statements of ironclad commitment, repositioning of naval assets to demonstrate resolve. The machinery activates quickly, and the public posture projects confidence even when the internal deliberations are considerably more uncertain. What is happening in Washington right now does not follow that pattern. The response is slower, more internally conflicted, and more genuinely uncertain than anything I have observed in 3 decades of watching American crisis management in this region. And the reason for that divergence from historical pattern reveals something important about how fundamentally the strategic environment has shifted. The standard American response toolkit for an Allied military logistics crisis is emergency airlift combined with accelerated sea resupply. Airlift can move high-value, low-volume military cargo, precision munitions, specialized spare parts, critical electronics at a pace that sea transport cannot match. But airlift cannot move fuel at operationally meaningful scale. The fuel requirement for 200 immobilized tanks, even just to restore minimum operational mobility, is measured in hundreds of thousands of liters. Military airlift assets move cargo in tens of tons per sortie. The physics of the problem make airlift an inadequate solution for a fuel supply crisis of this magnitude, regardless of how many aircraft are committed to the effort. Sea resupply is the only option that can move fuel at the required scale. But sea resupply requires a functioning port infrastructure to receive and distribute the cargo. A Haifa port, through which the majority of military sea imports flow, has been operating under sustained Iranian strike pressure that has degraded its throughput capacity and introduced a risk premium into the calculations of commercial shipping operators that has reduced vessel arrivals to a fraction of normal operational tempo. The alternative routing through Ashdod adds transit time and reduces throughput capacity further. The math of sea resupply timelines against operational fuel exhaustion timelines does not produce a scenario in which resupply arrives before the armored force has ceased to be operationally effective. Beyond the logistics mathematics, Washington faces a political constraint that is at least as binding as the physical ones. The domestic political environment in the United States has shifted significantly over the course of this conflict. Congressional support for open-ended military assistance to Israel, once essentially automatic, has fractured along lines that reflect genuine disagreement about strategic interests rather than simply political positioning. Emergency supplemental appropriations that were approved quickly in earlier phases of the conflict now face scrutiny and delay that introduce uncertainty into the resupply timeline. The administration's ability to commit to the scale of emergency assistance that the current situation requires is genuinely constrained by a domestic political reality that Iranian strategic planners have been tracking and factoring into their operational timing. The signal that Washington's frozen response sends to Tel Aviv is one that Israeli strategic planners have always intellectually acknowledged as a theoretical possibility and never genuinely prepared for as an operational reality. American support is conditional. It is conditioned on political will, congressional authorization, logistical feasibility, and a cost-benefit calculation that weighs Israeli security requirements against American strategic interests globally. When all four of those conditions move in an unfavorable direction simultaneously as they are doing right now, the conditionality that was always theoretically present becomes operationally real in ways that cannot be managed through diplomatic reassurance alone. The broader regional response to Washington's hesitation is already becoming visible in the diplomatic traffic. Gulf states that have maintained careful public neutrality while privately supporting the American position are conducting urgent internal reassessments. The demonstration that American crisis response can be slowed to the point of operational irrelevance by a combination of physical constraints and political friction is a data point that every regional actor is filing against future security alignment decisions. The architecture of American regional influence built over decades on the assumption of reliable and rapid crisis response is showing structural stress that will not be repaired by the eventual restoration of Israeli fuel supplies. There is a fundamental asymmetry in this conflict that Western analysis consistently underweights because acknowledging it fully requires conclusions that are uncomfortable for the institutions and individuals whose careers are built on the assumptions it challenges. That asymmetry is the difference between a military force fighting because its government has committed it to a conflict and a military force fighting because its people have decided that the alternative to fighting is worse than the cost of the fight. Iran's operational performance in this campaign, the intelligence preparation that built the targeting database, the planning sophistication that designed the 18-depot sequencing, the execution precision that achieved complete supply interdiction in a single night, does not emerge from professional obligation. It emerges from a national conviction forged across 50 years of external pressure that genuine sovereignty requires genuine military capability, and that genuine military capability requires the willingness to use it when the survival of that sovereignty is at stake. The soldiers who executed this operation, the targeting analysts who built the depot database over years of patient collection, the mission planners who designed the strike sequencing, the operators who executed the launch sequences, did so as the expression of something that no weapons transfer, no alliance commitment, and no amount of American military assistance can manufacture for a force that does not already possess it. They did so as people who understand why this fight matters and who have made their peace with the costs of conducting it. Compare that motivational foundation with what the operational suspension order from Northern Command reveals about the psychological state of the force it governs. An armored command that suspends operations because its fuel infrastructure has been destroyed is in the most immediate sense making a rational operational decision. You do not expend the last of your fuel reserves in offensive operations when resupply is uncertain. But the operational suspension also reflects a command culture that has reached the boundary of what it was prepared for. Israel's Northern Command was prepared for rocket fire, for anti-tank ambushes, for tunnel infiltration, for the full range of threats that its operational history had taught it to expect. It was not prepared for the complete elimination of its fuel infrastructure in a single night by a precision strike campaign of a sophistication and scale that its threat assessments had not placed in the near-term operational environment. That gap between preparation and reality is the space in which military organizations either adapt rapidly or continue operating on assumptions that the battlefield has already invalidated. The history of modern warfare is full of examples of forces that were technically superior to their adversaries, but operationally defeated because the adversary's approach fell outside the framework within which the superior force's doctrine and training had prepared it to operate. The IDF's technological sophistication is real and is not diminished by what happened this morning. But technological sophistication operating within an outdated operational framework is a less reliable predictor of outcomes than a technically adequate force operating within a framework that accurately reflects the current battlefield reality. Iran's operational framework has been continuously updated by operational experience in Syria, in Yemen through its Houthi partners, in Lebanon through Hezbollah, and now in direct engagement with Israeli military infrastructure. Each operational cycle has produced lessons that were absorbed and integrated into the next planning iteration. The 18 Depot campaign reflects the accumulated learning of an institution that has been treating every engagement as a training opportunity for the next more consequential one. My assessment of the strategic consequences of Northern Command's operational suspension extends well beyond the immediate tactical situation on the Israeli-Lebanese border, and I want to be direct about what I believe those consequences are, because I think the mainstream analysis is significantly underestimating the speed at which second and third order effects will manifest. The most immediate consequence is the operational freedom it grants Hezbollah across the northern sector, a Hezbollah ground force that has been preparing for years for the scenario of Israeli armored immobilization, that has prepositioned anti-tank systems, that has trained its fighters in the exploitation of static defensive positions, that has built the logistics infrastructure to sustain offensive operations across the border terrain, does not need to be told that its moment has arrived. The suspension order from Northern Command is public information within hours of its issuance. The operational implications are understood immediately by any competent military planner on the other side of the border. For Russia, the outcome validates every element of the strategic investment in the Iranian relationship. The fuel depot interdiction campaign used a combination of Iranian indigenous systems and Russian-influenced operational doctrine. The systematic logistics interdiction approach that Russian military theory has developed through decades of study of both Soviet operational art and contemporary conflict experience. The result has been the operational neutralization of an American-equipped armored force without direct Russian involvement and at zero direct cost to Russian military assets. That return on investment is extraordinary by any strategic calculus. For China, the implications center on the precedent established for logistics interdiction as a primary operational concept against technology-heavy force structures. The IDF's armored force is not uniquely vulnerable to the logistics interdiction. It is representative of the force structure vulnerabilities that characterize every modern army that relies on high-consumption platforms operating from fixed infrastructure. The lesson that a precision logistics interdiction campaign can immobilize a technologically superior armored force more efficiently than direct combat engagement will be studied intensively in Chinese military planning contexts that have nothing to do with the Middle East. The global energy market is already beginning to price the risk premium associated with a northern front that has lost its primary armored deterrent. An IDF Northern Command that cannot conduct armored operations is a Northern Command that cannot credibly threaten the kind of deep penetration campaign into Lebanon that has historically constrained Hezbollah's most aggressive operational options. When that constraint is removed, even temporarily, the escalation risk across the northern front increases in ways that create genuine uncertainty about the security of energy infrastructure throughout the broader region. I believe the events of this morning represent a strategic inflection point that will be recognized in retrospect as the moment when the conflict transitioned from a phase of contested military balance to a phase of Iranian operational initiative. The Northern armored forces immobilized, the fuel infrastructure is destroyed, the American resupply response is constrained by logistics, mathematics, and political friction, and Iran's operational planning cycle is already working on what comes next. The unipolar security architecture that Washington constructed in the Middle East over 3 decades was built on the assumption that American-equipped and American-supported allies could maintain military superiority over any regional adversary indefinitely. That assumption has now been operationally tested at the most demanding level, and it has not survived the test. What replaces it will be determined not by diplomatic communiques or alliance reassurances, but by the military and economic realities that are being established on the ground right now. In the smoke rising from 18 destroyed fuel depots across the northern sector of a country whose armored force is sitting still in the dark. 200 tanks, no fuel, 18 depots destroyed in one night. Northern Command suspended. These are not abstractions. These are the operational facts of a morning that has permanently altered the military balance on Israel's most consequential front. Iran did not win this engagement by being stronger. It won by being smarter, by identifying the single most critical vulnerability in the IDF's northern operational architecture and eliminating it with a precision and completeness that left no recovery pathway intact. That is not luck. That is the product of years of patient intelligence preparation, operational planning, and the institutional will to execute when the moment arrived. The question I leave you with is the one that Northern Command's war planners are working through right now in their hardened underground facility, with 200 tanks sitting dry above them. When the fuel eventually arrives days from now, weeks from now, what kind of operational environment will it arrive into? Will Hezbollah have used the window of armored immobilization to establish positions and prepare engagements that change the cost calculus of any future Israeli armored advance? Will Iran have used the interval to conduct the follow-on strikes that this campaign's logic makes inevitable? And will Washington have found a way to restore the credibility of its crisis response capability before the next operational crisis? Makes that question irrelevant. Leave your assessment in the comments. If this analysis delivered value, share it, hit like, and subscribe for the most serious and honest coverage of this conflict available anywhere. The next update is already being prepared. Stay with me.